The second poem I'm going to share with you is called Bending Down to Worship, from my second collection, Map of a Plantation, which I'm happy to say won the Poetry Book Award in 2021. I wrote the collection during the first extremely frightening days of the COVID-19 lockdown in 2020, and used the silence I felt all around me to write poems that were, in many ways, quite painful and challenging. But I think that being cut off from the usual distractions really helped me to focus on writing poems that were set on an imaginary sugarcane estate in Jamaica during the 19th century. The poems were a way for me to channel the research I had done into British transatlantic enslavement more directly, and I decided early on to try and give voice to the enslaved and the enslavers. In doing this, I wanted to complicate the question of autonomy, often defined as a person's right to make decisions about their own lives. It was clear from my research that autonomy was the very last thing enslaved people had. And yet there were so many examples of enslaved people who either took action to free themselves by running away or by desperate acts of suicide. But it's also clear that defiance took many forms, not just violent opposition, but in small acts of resistance, like secretly learning to read when this activity was forbidden if you were enslaved. I wanted to write about a character who defied her false imprisonment, which is what enslavement amounts to, false imprisonment with hard labour. I wanted to show this woman gaining strength simply by working the land she loved. I'll share the poem now and talk in more detail about what it means to me. Hopefully, it will say something to you about autonomy. Bending Down to Worship. Church Mary said her God was in the ground, not Satan, but all the things that grew, and flowers were the gems upon his crown. She made a garden all around her house, a broken shack she called a palace where she reigned. You couldn't step beyond her door unless you bought her a bouquet or something green and pulsing full of life. She filled each bowl and glass she found with blooms she called her jewels, though they were better as they gave a lovely scent. She tended to her tiny Eden till the flowers reached above her head, the colours bold against black skin, so filled with shining light. Her head wraps were like floral wreaths, and every dress was made of faded flowers, the age-old boots like clumps of mud. The days when she was forced to work out in the fields, she feared the sun might scorch her garden. She ran out of the cane the moment that the whistle blew and went to fetch pure water from the stream. Her flowers had to live as they were all the freedom that she knew. On nights when she was grieving, she went outside to kneel amongst the plants, bend her head and talk to God. He answered back by showing her another rock or stone she had to move, revealing yet more ground on which to grow more buds. One Sunday, as the white priest tried to make her go to church, she offered him a shining patch of land with one sweep of her arm. She said, "I never saw your Jesus, but when I die, I'll end up in the ground to feed the things I love to grow, and that is all the heaven I will need." He damned her as a godless slave, but when he left, she heard the voice of God again. He spoke to her of flowers as she bent to ornament his crown. The title, Bending Down to Worship, clearly refers to the act of kneeling to pray. But for me, it also says something about the true humility of the character Church Mary. In bowing to nature, she somehow suggests a refusal to bow to man or his beliefs. Her rejection of the white priest and his Jesus suggests not only a refusal to accept traditional religious ideas, but a rejection of a religion controlled by people who are oppressing and judging her, as the priest does when he damned her as a godless slave. Therefore, in kneeling to the land, She somehow raises herself above those who could be seen as above her. She inverts the idea of orthodox power from the beginning by saying her God was in the ground, which completely contradicts the Christian idea of God being above humans in a heavenly sky. So straight away we know that this woman won't believe what she's told, but has her own quietly radical way of looking at the world. I think she also demonstrates a real disdain for money, which was the whole reason for the barbaric so-called trade in human beings across the world. Enslavers were motivated by the enormous amounts of money they could make by forcing people to work for free. But Church Mary refuses to see money as the most important thing in the world. In the first stanza, she refers to flowers as gems, and in the second we are told she filled each bowl and glass she found with blooms she called her jewels, though they were better as they gave a lovely scent. I think these two examples suggest that for her, nature has more worth than money, a belief that feels very contemporary as we continue to suffer the impacts of climate crisis brought on by big business as well as everyday human activity. In a way, is she saying she has great worth and that enslavers are deluded if they think money means more than a human being? The third stanza seems to make her part of the tiny Eden she tends with such love and care. Even her clothes are described as being made of flowers, and that makes her part of nature itself, beautiful and free. This contrasts greatly with the beginning of the fourth stanza, when the reader learns that she is forced to work out in the fields. During my research, I read many times that the average life expectancy of enslaved people working in sugarcane and banana fields in the Caribbean was only 7 years. This was because of the scorching sun referenced in my poem, but also because they were beaten, overworked, and underfed. Despite the hard work she's forced to do, Church Mary shows such care for her garden, as if it is her family. This to me is remarkable in a woman who lives in a broken shack and clearly has very little money. Yet she creates something precious in her life. The poem itself makes her so high status in the end that God actually talks directly to her. He spoke to her of flowers as she bent to ornament his crown. In this poem, the enslaved woman, who could be seen as a pitiful victim, is shown to be strong, proud, and clear in her commitment to creating beauty. On some level, I wonder if that is the ultimate definition of freedom.